What if the end of all things isn't fire or ice or some cosmic calamity, but silence? A silence so profound it doesn't merely consume sound, but thought itself. A void so deep it strips away everything you are, leaving only the faintest echo of who you used to be. Imagine staring into that void and realizing, too late, that it's been staring back at you the whole time. That's SCP-3000, also known as Anantashesha. The name doesn't do it justice. The Foundation, in its infinite wisdom, labels it Thaumiel, which is a fancy way of saying it's both a world-ending threat and one of their most indispensable assets. SCP-3000 resides in the Bay of Bengal. The full length of SCP-3000 is impossible to determine, but is hypothesized to be between 600 and 900 kilometers. The head of SCP-3000 measures roughly 2.5 meters in diameter, and sections of the body proper are as large as 10 meters in diameter that sleeps or pretends to sleep in the crushing depths of the Ganges fan. Its appearance is deceptively simple. It looks like a giant moray eel, the kind you might find in a coral reef if you somehow stretched it to impossible proportions and imbued it with a presence that makes your skin crawl and your mind shatter. But its real horror isn't its size. It's what it does to you. SCP-3000 isn't content with being the largest known predator on Earth. It's also a Class 8 cognitohazard. That means simply being near it is a bad idea and seeing it? Worse, the closer you get, the more it unravels the delicate threads of your mind. Memory loss, paranoia, uncontrollable fear. Those are just appetizers. The main course? Watching yourself come apart, thought by thought, until you're nothing but a hollow shell. Let's talk containment, because naturally something this dangerous shouldn't be left alone, right? Officially, the area containing SCP-3000 spans a 300-kilometer diameter in the Bay of Bengal. The waters are patrolled by naval vessels under Foundation control, and civilian access is strictly prohibited. You might think the Foundation would have walled it off with steel and lasers by now, but no. Their plan is a little more pragmatic. See, SCP-3000 excretes a substance called Y909, a dark, viscous fluid that oozes from its skin whenever it feeds. Y909 isn't just another weird byproduct of an anomaly. It's the cornerstone of the Foundation's amnestics program. You know, the drugs they use to make people forget things they shouldn't remember. Y909 makes those drugs more stable, more effective, and longer lasting. There's just one catch. SCP-3000 only produces Y909 after consuming prey. And by prey, I mean us. Here's the system in place. The Foundation deploys a submarine, the SCP-F Eremita, equipped to carry out something called the ATSAC Protocol. D-class personnel, the ones they use for dirty work, are sedated, outfitted in diving suits, and sent to the feeding zone like bait on a hook. Once SCP-3000 takes the bait, because it always does, the beast excretes Y909. Teams of divers then extract the substance from its skin during a specific window of time, when its cognitohazardous effects are at their lowest. It's a tidy, efficient system, except for the part where it's utterly horrifying. Here's where it gets fun. Fun being a relative term when dealing with something that could turn your brain into mashed potatoes. SCP-3000 isn't like other anomalies. Most SCPs are content to defy the laws of nature or exist as objects of dread. SCP-3000, it has a way of making you question your very existence. Those who've come into contact with it describe feelings of emptiness, flashes of memories that aren't their own, and an overwhelming sense of futility. One diver, shortly before smashing his head against the porthole of his submersible, muttered the words, "There's nothing, nothing, nothing." And that's the thing about SCP-3000. It doesn't just show you the void, it makes you feel it. Now you might be wondering, why not kill it? Fire some torpedoes at it, drop a nuke, send it to whatever hell it crawled out of. The answer is simple and deeply unsettling. SCP-3000 doesn't just sit at the bottom of the ocean like some overgrown sea monster. It is the ocean. It stretches for kilometers, its body coiled and twisted like a living labyrinth. Destroying it isn't an option because to destroy SCP-3000 is to risk waking whatever deeper horror lies within. Plus, the Foundation needs that Y909. The Ethics Committee has debated the morality of the ATSAC protocol, but when the choice is between sacrificing a few to save the many, the math always works out in the Foundation's favor. Not that it helps the D-Class who vanish into SCP-3000's maw, their screams swallowed by the depths. SCP-3000's discovery in 1971 was an accident. A pair of Bangladeshi fishing boats disappeared near the Ganges Fan, prompting local authorities to investigate. When their search turned up nothing but shredded nets and bits of splintered wood, the Foundation stepped in. What they found wasn't just a predator. It was something primordial. Something that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of human comprehension. The Foundation's first attempt at contact ended in disaster. A submersible carrying 3 divers descended into the creature's domain. They made it within 300 meters of SCP-3000 before things went south. One diver began calling his teammates by the names of long-dead colleagues. Another spoke in a language no one recognized. The third started rambling about eyes in the dark. Within minutes, all 3 were gone. The logs from that mission are classified, but what little has been leaked reads like the ravings of a lunatic. Phrases like, "The eel remains," and "It's inside me," appear over and over. Whatever SCP-3000 is, it's not just a threat to the body. It's a threat to the mind, the soul, if such a thing even exists. So, here we are, 50 years later, and the Foundation still hasn't cracked the mystery of SCP-3000. Is it a god? A monster? A mistake? Opinions vary. Dr. Venkat Krishnamurthy, a marine biologist who spent years studying the anomaly, believed it was the Hindu serpent deity Anantashesha, the one said to survive the end of time itself. His colleagues dismissed the theory as superstition, until Krishnamurthy walked into the Eremita's airlock and fed himself to the creature, leaving behind only a cryptic statement. "I was wrong. It's not." The rest of the sentence died with him. Others, like Dr. Anand Manava, have tried to approach SCP-3000 with a purely scientific lens. Manava's conclusion? It breaks down human consciousness and scatters the part of us that we believe is a soul until all that remains is what we really are. Electrical signals that will someday become inert. Comforting, isn't it? Now, if you're wondering why any of this matters to you, consider this. SCP-3000 doesn't just consume people. It consumes memories, ideas, identity. It's not enough for it to kill you. It has to erase you, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. And yet, the Foundation keeps going back. Because for all its horrors, SCP-3000 is useful, vital even. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying part of all. Not the monster itself, but the system built around it. A system that turns people into numbers, sacrifices into protocols, and terror into business as usual. But hey, it's all for the greater good, right? You know the story, don't you? How humanity, in its arrogance, believes it has mapped every corner of this planet, mastered every force of nature. But there are places even our most daring expeditions have barely touched. Places that exist not in defiance of our understanding, but far beyond it. The Bay of Bengal, 1971. The fishermen never saw the storm coming. In the Bay of Bengal, storms could erupt without warning, the placid waters turning to chaos in moments. But that night, it wasn't nature's wrath that swallowed the 2 Bangladeshi boats and their 15-man crew. It was something else, something far older than the waters themselves. The crew of the first vessel, Jal Shakti, had been hauling in nets heavy with fish when the surface began to shimmer. At first, they thought it was the reflection of the moon, broken by the shifting tide. But as the water grew darker, they realized the light wasn't coming from above. It was coming from below. "Shabda Sunchen?" one of the crew whispered, his voice trembling. "Did you hear that?" Another fisherman shushed him, scanning the horizon. There was no wind, no waves, just the eerie stillness of a too-calm sea. Then came the smell, a pungent, rancid stench, like rotting flesh left in the sun. "Get the engine started," the captain ordered, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. But before anyone could act, the nets tightened. Something immense tugged at them, pulling the boat with such force that it listed dangerously to one side. The fishermen scrambled, shouting over one another as the deck tilted beneath their feet. "Cut the lines," the captain screamed. No one moved fast enough. A shadow, impossibly vast, rose from the depths. It was not a wave, nor a whale, nor any creature the fishermen could name. The shadow moved with an alien grace, coiling and uncoiling, blotting out the stars. Then they saw the eyes. 2 pinpricks of void stared at them from the abyss, swallowing the moonlight. The fishermen screamed as the darkness reached for them, the boat shuddering under the weight of something too large to fathom. By morning, the Jal Shakti and her sister vessel, the Prithvi, were gone. The only sign they had ever existed was a slick of dark, viscous fluid floating on the waves, its surface broken by the occasional shattered plank. When the reports of the missing boats reached the SCP Foundation, it was dismissed as a maritime accident. Piracy, perhaps, or an unseasonal typhoon. But then came the survivors' 3 men who had washed ashore weeks later, delirious and incoherent. One of them, a man named Jahangir Rahman, had clawed at his own eye so violently that his face was a ruin of blood and torn flesh. "Shesh hoyeche," he muttered over and over. "It's the end." The other 2 were no better. One had forgotten his name, his family, even his language, while the last sat rocking in silence, his eyes fixed on some distant, unseen terror. By the time the Foundation intervened, the survivors were dead. Rahman's body was found hanging from a tree in the hospital courtyard, his blood smeared across the walls in incomprehensible symbols. The Foundation dispatched a reconnaissance team to the Bay of Bengal. Their orders were clear: locate the anomaly, assess the threat, and report back. They found far more than they had bargained for. The SCPF Stravinsky was a state-of-the-art research submarine, equipped with the best sonar and deep-sea technology the Foundation could muster. Its crew of 25, led by Captain Elias Ritter, was among the most experienced in the Foundation's Marine Division. On the first day, the Stravinsky detected unusual readings near the Ganges Phantom massive underwater canyon system at the heart of the bay. The water temperature dropped sharply as they descended, and the sonar began to register faint rhythmic pulses. "It's alive," murmured Dr. Eugene Getz, the lead researcher, as he studied the data. "Whatever it is, it's moving." By the second day, the crew began to experience headaches. Minor at first, but growing worse as they approached the source of the anomaly. By the third day, the headaches had escalated to hallucinations. Crew members reported hearing whispers, seeing shadows flicker at the edges of their vision. Williams, the ship's biologist, was the first to crack. "I can hear it in my head," he whispered to Dr. Getz, his hands trembling. "It's not just a sound. It's a voice." That night, Williams attacked the porthole with his fists, screaming about eyes in the dark. He had to be sedated, his hands wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. When the Stravinsky finally reached the anomaly, the crew was on the verge of mutiny. But nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. The creature, later designated SCP-3000, lay coiled in the canyon, its immense body stretching into the abyss. Its head alone was larger than the submarine, with a mouth that opened into darkness and eyes that seemed to pierce through the hull. "God in heaven," Captain Ritter muttered as the creature began to move. The first attack was swift. SCP-3000 surged forward, with a speed that belied its size, its jaws closing around the submarine's tethered sonar array. The Stravinsky rocked violently, alarms blaring as the crew scrambled to regain control. "Surface now!" Ritter shouted, but the creature wasn't finished. As the submarine ascended, SCP-3000 followed, its massive body twisting through the water like a serpent. Its presence was overwhelming, not just physically, but mentally. Dr. Getz collapsed, clutching his head as he muttered nonsensical phrases. Another crewman tore off his oxygen mask, screaming that he couldn't breathe. By the time the Stravinsky reached the surface, 5 crew members were dead, 3 by their own hands. The Foundation wasted no time. The area was declared a quarantine zone, and SCP-3000 was officially classified as thaumiel. Containment procedures were established, and the ATSAC protocol was born. But the Foundation knew it was only a matter of time before the eel claimed more lives. And so the Eremita was sent, its crew sworn to secrecy, its purpose clear, to harvest the dark substance that oozed from SCP-3000's flesh. A substance that could erase memories, alter perceptions, and bend reality itself. The substance that would become Y909, the substance that demanded a price. The SCP-F Eremita loomed in the depths like a leviathan of its own, its steel hull streaked with corrosion and barnacles. It wasn't designed for comfort, nor even long-term occupation. Every corner of the submarine screamed function over form, a labyrinth of narrow passageways, flickering fluorescent lights, and the constant hum of machinery. The crew called it the Tomb. For those stationed aboard, the Eremita was both a prison and a sanctuary. A place where time bent, stretched, and broke. Days bled into weeks, and memories drifted like sediment in murky water. 12 D-class personnel shuffled down the central corridor, their boots clanging against the metal floor. Each carried the weariness of a life spent at the edge of survival, their faces etched with resentment, fear, and faint glimmers of hope. One of the guards barked orders, her voice sharp and unforgiving. "Eyes forward, no talking. You're not here to make friends." The group moved in silence, except for the occasional hiss of the pressurized doors opening and closing behind them. At the head of the line, a man in his early 40s glanced over his shoulder. His name tag read D9932, though in another life he had been Henry Castellano, a small-time grifter from San Diego. He had survived 4 months in the Foundation's custody, a feat in itself. "Smells like death in here," Henry muttered under his breath. The man behind him, a lanky figure with hollow cheeks, chuckled darkly. "Better get used to it." A guard slammed the butt of his rifle into the wall. "Shut it! Keep moving!" Life aboard the Eremita was dictated by the ATSAC protocol. Every day was the same: cleaning, maintenance, and isolation. The submarine's crew scientists, technicians, and security officers worked in shifts, their tasks carried out with mechanical precision. At the heart of the operation was Y909, the viscous gray substance harvested from SCP-3000. Its value to the Foundation was incalculable, its effects on memory and cognition unparalleled. But extracting it required sacrifices, human sacrifices. Dr. Anand Manava stood in the briefing room, a cigarette trembling between his fingers. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled. He hadn't slept in 2 days. "This is your first rotation," he began, addressing the assembled D-class personnel. "You've been selected for a critical operation. The substance we're collecting is vital to the Foundation's mission. Without it, we can't do what we do." Henry raised his hand, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "And what exactly do we do, Doc? Aside from being fish food?" A murmur rippled through the room, quickly silenced by a glare from the guards. Dr. Manava exhaled a long plume of smoke. "Your role is simple. You'll assist the dive team in preparing equipment, monitoring the tether systems, and if selected, participating in sample collection." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what sample collection meant. "The eel," one of the D-Class whispered. "We have to go near it?" Dr. Manava's gaze hardened. SCP-3000 is a Class 8 cognitohazard. Its effects on the human mind are well documented. That's why we've implemented strict protocols to minimize risk. Stick to your tasks, and you'll be fine. "Yeah, sure," Henry muttered, "because this place screams safety." The new arrivals quickly fell into the rhythm of life aboard the Eremita. Each day began with a head count, followed by 8 hours of labor. The tasks were menial scrubbing floors, repairing equipment, and preparing dive suits. But it was the nights that broke them. In the cramped sleeping quarters, dreams took on a life of their own. Faces from forgotten pasts appeared in vivid detail, their voices muffled and distant. Some dreamt of places they'd never been, sunlit meadows, bustling cities, or the quiet solitude of a childhood home. Others dreamt of the eel. Henry woke one night in a cold sweat, his hands trembling. He didn't remember falling asleep, but the vision of a massive, unblinking eye burned in his mind. It was the same every night. The weightlessness, the darkness, the suffocating presence of something ancient and unfathomable. Across the room, another D-Class stirred in his bunk. "You see it too?" the man whispered. Henry nodded, his voice hoarse. "Every goddamn time." The day of the feeding began like any other. The crew gathered in the main hall, their faces grim as they prepared for the inevitable. A single D-Class was selected, his number drawn at random. The unlucky man, D8347, a wiry figure with sunken eyes, was escorted to the aft airlock, his protests ignored by the guards. Dr. Manava stood nearby, clipboard in hand. "Sedate him," he ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. The man struggled as the needle pierced his neck, his cries fading into incoherent murmurs. The Eremita shuddered as the airlock flooded, the tether system creaking under the strain. Outside, the abyss stretched endlessly, the submarine's floodlights barely penetrating the murk. As the ROV guided D8347 toward SCP-3000's feeding site, the crew watched in tense silence. On the monitors, the eel's massive form began to materialize, a shifting shadow against the inky blackness. Dr. Manava leaned forward, his knuckles white against the console. "Movement detected," a technician reported. The eel stirred, its head rising from the depths. Its eyes glowed faintly, twin orbs of void that seemed to pierce through the screens. Henry stood at the back of the room, his stomach churning as the creature's immense jaws opened. The feeding was over in seconds. Back in the sleeping quarters, the D-Class personnel sat in uneasy silence. No one spoke of what they had seen, but the tension was palpable. Henry stared at the wall, his mind racing. The image of the eel burned in his memory, its presence a weight he couldn't shake. Across the room, another man whispered, "Do you think it knows we're here?" Henry didn't answer. Deep down, he already knew the truth. The smell of antiseptic filled the briefing room as Dr. Bell addressed the dive team. His voice was calm, measured an anchor against the growing storm of unease. "You've all been trained for this," he began, his eyes scanning the room. "You know the risks. SCP-3000 is a Class 8 cognitohazard, and its effects are unpredictable. But if we follow protocol, we'll get through this." Henry Castellano sat near the back, his arms crossed. He wasn't part of the dive team, but he couldn't resist listening in. The air was heavy with apprehension, and he could see it in the faces of the others, strained, pale, and glistening with sweat. One of the divers, a stocky man named Torres, raised a hand. "Doc, what happens if the tether fails? If something goes wrong down there?" Bell's pause was telling. "We have contingency plans," he said finally. "Focus on your training and trust the team." Behind him, a monitor displayed a live feed of SCP-3000's territory, a yawning abyss that seemed to pull the light into itself. Even on a screen, the void was unsettling. "Remember," Bell continued, "you're not alone out there. We're monitoring everything from here. Stick to the plan, and you'll be fine." As the meeting ended and the team dispersed, Henry lingered by the doorway. He felt the tension radiating from the divers as they prepared their gear, their conversations hushed and clipped. Torres and his partner, Nguyen, argued in low voices over a malfunctioning tether clamp. "I fixed this yesterday," Nguyen muttered, tightening the bolts. "You sure about that?" Torres snapped. "Because if this thing snaps, we're fucked." Henry stepped closer, his voice casual. "You guys good?" Nguyen looked up, his face shadowed. "Yeah, just stay out of it." Henry shrugged and walked away, but the exchange gnawed at him. The crew's cohesion was unraveling, frayed by the ever-present pressure of their task. The dive team suited up in silence, their movements stiff and deliberate. The airlock chamber buzzed with activity as technicians checked oxygen levels, tether lines, and communication systems. Nguyen glanced at Torres as they entered the water. "You feel that?" "Feel what?" "Like something's watching." Torres rolled his eyes. "It's just the eel screwing with your head. Focus." The water rushed in as the chamber flooded, muffling all sound except for the hiss of their breathing. The team descended into the abyss, their headlamps cutting weak beams through the darkness. The first 20 meters were uneventful, the only sounds the gentle hum of the ROV guiding their path. But as they descended further, the light from the Eremita faded, leaving them suspended in a void. "Visibility's dropping," Torres said, his voice crackling over the comms. "Hold formation," Bell replied from the control room. "You're approaching the feeding site." The dive team's lights caught the first glimpse of SCP-3000's form, a massive coiling shadow that seemed to shift and writhe against the seabed. Its skin glistened with a dark, oily sheen, and faint pulses of bioluminescence rippled along its body. "Jesus," Nguyen breathed. Torres gritted his teeth. "Keep moving. We've got a job to do." The team advanced cautiously, their tethers taut as they neared the creature's head. It lay dormant, its massive jaws partially open, revealing rows of jagged, translucent teeth. "Collection team, prepare the vials," Bell ordered. Nguyen unclipped a glass vial from his belt, his hands trembling. "This stuff better be worth it," he muttered. "Stay focused," Torres snapped. "We're almost done." But as Nguyen approached the viscous fluid seeping from SCP-3000's skin, the creature stirred. The movement was subtle at first, a ripple along its body, a faint twitch of its massive head, but then its eyes opened. "Contact! We've got movement!" Torres shouted. The eel's eyes glowed faintly, twin voids that seemed to draw the team closer. Nguyen froze, his breath hitching. "Nguyen, move!" Bell's voice crackled over the comms. I can't," Nguyen whispered, his body rigid. SCP-3000's head turned slowly, its gaze locking onto the team. The creature's presence was overwhelming, its size and malevolence defying comprehension. Torres grabbed Nguyen's arm, yanking him back. "Get the samples and go, now!" The eel struck without warning. Its jaws snapped shut around the ROV, crushing it in an instant. The shockwave sent the team reeling, their tethers straining as they scrambled to regain their footing. "Mayday! Mayday!" Torres shouted. "We've got casualties!" Nguyen was pulled from the group, his tether snapping as the eel coiled around him. His screams echoed through the comms before cutting off abruptly. "Fall back," Bell ordered. "Abort the mission." The remaining divers struggled to ascend, their lights flickering as SCP-3000 pursued them. Its body twisted through the water with impossible speed, its movements both graceful and predatory. Torres looked over his shoulder, his heart pounding as the eel closed in. "We're not gonna make it!" Henry's voice crackled over the comms. "Torres, keep moving, don't stop!" The eel lunged again, its massive head colliding with the tether lines. One by one, the lines snapped, leaving the team adrift in the darkness. Torres managed to grab a severed line, pulling himself toward the faint glow of the Eremita's floodlights. Behind him, the eel loomed, its jaws opening once more. He reached the airlock just as the creature struck, the force of the impact sending shockwaves through the hull. The chamber flooded as the doors sealed, and Torres collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. Inside the control room, Bell stared at the monitors, his face pale. "Status report." A technician shook his head. "We've lost Nguyen. No sign of the others." Back aboard the submarine, the survivors were met with silence. The loss of their comrades hung heavy in the air, a grim reminder of the risks they faced. Torres sat in the infirmary, his hands shaking as a medic stitched a gash on his arm. "We never should have gone down there," he muttered. Henry watched from the doorway, his jaw clenched. "This isn't over," he said quietly. In the control room, Bell examined the recovered Y909 sample. The viscous gray substance glistened under the harsh fluorescent lights, its presence a stark contrast to the loss it had caused. As he placed the vial into a containment unit, a faint whisper echoed in his mind, a voice he didn't recognize. "It's watching," the voice said. Bell froze, his hands trembling. He turned to the nearest monitor, his heart sinking as the screen flickered. SCP-3000's eyes stared back at him. The lights on the Aramida flickered as the submarine's engines hummed against the oppressive weight of the abyss. The atmosphere inside was heavy, an invisible pressure that wrapped around the crew and squeezed. It wasn't just grief for the lost divers. It was something darker, a creeping dread that burrowed into their minds. Torres sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at his hands. The tremors hadn't stopped since the dive. His thoughts were fragmented, slipping through his grasp like water. He couldn't remember what Nguyen's face looked like. "You're lucky to be alive," Henry said from across the room, his voice low. Torres didn't look up. "Am I?" Henry frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Torres finally met his gaze, his eyes hollow. "I can still feel it, in my head. It's like it's still watching me." Henry wanted to brush it off, to tell Torres he was imagining things, but the truth lodged itself in his throat. He'd felt it too, the weight of the eel's gaze, even through the monitors. Across the room, one of the other D-class, a wiry man named Decker, chuckled nervously. "We're all losing it down here," he muttered. "No one's coming out of this sane." The mess hall was silent except for the clatter of trays and the hum of fluorescent lights. The crew ate in small clusters, their conversations muted. Henry sat alone, picking at his food. Across the room, Dr. Bell argued quietly with another scientist. "You're overreacting," Bell hissed. "The mission was a success. We got the sample." "Success?" the other man snapped. "We lost 3 divers. And have you seen Torres? He's barely holding it together." Bell's face darkened. "We knew the risks. Everyone on board signed up for this." Before the argument could escalate, a scream rang out. All heads turned to see Decker standing in the middle of the room, his hands clutching his head. "It's in me!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "It's in my head!" The guards moved quickly, pinning him to the floor as he thrashed and screamed. Henry stood frozen, his pulse hammering in his ears. "It's not real!" one of the guards barked, trying to restrain Decker. "Calm down!" But Decker's screams didn't stop. His eyes rolled back and his body convulsed violently before going limp. After Decker's collapse, the mood aboard the Aramida grew even darker. Whispers filled the narrow corridors. Muted theories, fears of contagion, and rumors of SCP-3000's influence spreading. In the control room, Bell watched the monitors with a growing sense of unease. The eel hadn't moved since the dive, but its presence felt stronger, as if it were pressing against the walls of the submarine. "Anything unusual?" Bell asked one of the technicians. The man hesitated. Not physically, but the crew." He trailed off, his expression uneasy. "What about the crew?" Bell pressed. "They're forgetting things," the technician said. "Small things at first, where they put their tools, the names of their bunkmates. But it's getting worse." Bell nodded, his stomach sinking. "Keep an eye on it. Let me know if it escalates." Torres woke in the middle of the night to the sound of whispering. He sat up, his heart pounding as he scanned the room. The other bunks were empty. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling. The whispers grew louder, a disjointed murmur that seemed to come from all directions. He stumbled to his feet, his vision swimming. The walls seemed to pulse, the metal breathing like a living thing. Then he saw a shadow moving just beyond the range of his flickering flashlight. "Stay back," he shouted. raising his hands defensively. The shadow stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then it lunged. By morning, the Eremita was in chaos. Torres was found unconscious in the hallway, his fingernails bloody from clawing at the walls. Dr. Manova tried to interview him, but Torres was incoherent, his words tumbling over each other in a frantic stream of gibberish. "It's everywhere," Torres whispered, his eyes darting around the room. "It's in the walls, in my head. I can't get it out." Manova leaned back, his expression grim. The crew's paranoia reached a breaking point later that day when one of the guards shot himself in the arm, claiming he saw something crawling under his skin. Bell ordered an immediate lockdown, restricting movement and implementing stricter containment protocols. But it wasn't enough. Henry sat in the bunk room staring at the photo taped to the wall above his bed. It was of a woman and a young boy, his wife and son. At least, he thought they were. The faces were familiar, but the memory felt wrong. The boy's laugh echoed in his mind, but it was hollow, like a recording played too many times. "Henry?" He turned to see Dr. Manova standing in the doorway. The man looked worse than ever, pale, gaunt, and trembling. "What do you want?" Henry asked, his voice flat. Manova hesitated. I need your help. Something's wrong with the crew, with all of us." Henry snorted. "No kidding." "I mean it," Manova said, his voice rising. "I've been reviewing the records, the symptoms, the memory loss, the paranoia. It's not just the eel, it's the Y909. Henry frowned. "What are you talking about?" Manova held up a clipboard, his hands shaking. "The compound isn't just an amnestic. It's a conduit. A piece of the eel broken off and spread through us. Every time we harvest it, we're letting it into our minds." Henry stared at him, his blood running cold. Before he could respond, the lights flickered and the alarms blared. In the control room, Bell stared at the monitors in horror. SCP-3000 was moving. The eel uncoiled slowly, its immense body shifting through the water like a living nightmare. Its head turned toward the Eremita, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "It's coming for us," Bell whispered. The submarine shuddered as SCP-3000 approached, its jaws opening to reveal rows of jagged teeth. "Emergency dive," Bell shouted. "Get us out of here." The crew scrambled to respond, but the eel was faster. It struck the hull with a force that sent the Eremita spinning, alarms blaring as water began to flood the lower decks. In the chaos, Henry and Manova clung to a railing, their eyes wide with terror. "We're not getting out of this," Manova said, his voice hollow. Henry tightened his grip. "Like hell we're not." The eel struck again, its body coiling around the submarine. The pressure was immense, the walls groaning as the creature tightened its grip. Bell's voice crackled over the intercom. "Abandon ship, everyone to the escape pods." Henry and Manova ran through the corridors, the submarine tilting violently beneath their feet. Behind them, the sounds of tearing metal and rushing water grew louder. They reached the escape pods just as SCP-3000's jaws closed around the Eremita. Hours later, the surviving escape pods floated on the surface, their occupants staring at the endless expanse of water. Henry sat in silence, his mind a fog of memories, most of which weren't his own. Next to him, Manova clutched a vial of Y909, his expression unreadable. "We survived," Henry muttered. Manova didn't respond. In the distance, the water rippled, and Henry felt the eel's gaze once more. The ocean was eerily calm. Beneath the surface, the Eremita lay broken, its twisted remains scattered across the seabed like the skeleton of a fallen titan. Debris floated in the water above it, illuminated by faint beams of sunlight struggling to penetrate the depths. But SCP-3000 was still there. It coiled languidly around the wreckage, its immense form blending with the shadows. Its head moved slowly, jaws parting just enough to reveal the jagged teeth within. The eel was patient. It had always been patient. The survivors aboard the escape pods floated in silence. The rhythmic slap of waves against the hulls was the only sound, a steady reminder of the void that waited below. Henry Castellano sat with his back against the pod's interior, his hands clenched into fists. He could still feel the Aramita breaking apart beneath him, hear the screams of the crew as SCP-3000 tightened its grip. Across from him, Dr. Manava stared out the porthole. The vial of Y909 rested in his lap, its viscous contents shifting with every ripple of the sea. "We need to go back," Manava said, his voice hollow. Henry looked at him, incredulous. "Are you out of your mind?" Manava's gaze didn't waver. "If we don't, everything we've done here will be for nothing. The mission's over," Henry snapped. "Look around. There's nothing left." Manava turned to face him, his eyes bloodshot and haunted. "You don't understand. This isn't just about us. The Y909, it's tied to the eel. If we lose control of it..." He trailed off, shaking his head. Henry laughed bitterly. "Control, look where that's gotten us." Hours passed before the Foundation's rescue vessel arrived. The SCPF Endeavor was a stark contrast to the Aramita sleek, modern, and equipped with state-of-the-art technology. But even its crew moved with trepidation, their eyes darting nervously toward the water. Dr. Bell, alive but shaken, greeted the rescue team with clipped instructions. "We need a retrieval team to recover what we can from the wreckage. Priority 1 is the Y909 samples." The rescue leader, a stern woman named Captain Silva, frowned. "You want to send divers down there? After what just happened?" Bell nodded grimly. "We don't have a choice." Silva glanced at the nervous faces of her crew. "What about SCP-3000? Is it active?" Bell hesitated. "We think it's dormant, for now." 4 divers suited up, their movements mechanical. Each step of preparation was accompanied by an unspoken tension, a shared understanding of the danger they faced. Henry watched from the deck, his stomach churning. He'd volunteered for the mission, but Bell had overruled him. "We need someone up here to help coordinate," Bell had said, "and you're too close to this." Henry wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a dismissal. As the divers descended into the depths, the Endeavor's crew monitored their progress closely. The sonar feed displayed the wreckage of the Aramita, its hull split open like a gutted fish. "It's quiet down there," one of the technicians muttered. "Too quiet," Silva replied. The divers moved cautiously through the wreckage, their lights cutting through the murk. Broken beams and twisted metal jutted from the submarine's remains, creating a labyrinthine landscape. "This is Diver 1, a voice crackled over the comms. "We're approaching the main lab. Looks intact." "Copy that," Bell replied. "Proceed with caution." Inside the lab, the divers found shattered equipment and overturned tables. But amid the chaos, they located what they had come for. A reinforced containment case holding several vials of Y909. "Got it," Diver 2 reported. "We're heading back." As they exited the wreckage, the water around them seemed to grow darker, thicker. "Do you feel that?" Diver 3 asked, his voice tight. "Feel what?" "It's like pressure in my head." Before anyone could respond, the sonar feed lit up with movement. "Contact!" Silva shouted. "Get them out of there!" SCP-3000 moved with terrifying speed. Its massive body coiled around the wreckage, its head snapping toward the divers with predatory intent. "Break formation!" Diver 1 yelled, his voice rising in panic. The team scattered, their tethers straining as they swam frantically toward the surface. The eel pursued, its jaws closing around Diver 4 in an instant. The others barely had time to react before the creature surged forward again, its movements almost too fast to track. "Pull them up," Silva ordered. The winches groaned as the divers were reeled in. But SCP-3000 wasn't finished. It struck the lines, snapping one with a single bite. Diver 2 screamed as he was dragged into the darkness, his light winking out. Back on the Endeavor, Bell and Manava watched in horror as the sonar feed flickered. "We're losing them," Bell muttered. Manava gritted his teeth. "We need to distract it. Give the others a chance to escape." "How?" Manava didn't answer. He grabbed the vial of Y909 and ran toward the airlock. Henry saw him go and followed. "What the hell are you doing?" Manava turned, his expression fierce. "You said it yourself, we're out of control. If we don't end this now, it'll never stop." Before Henry could stop him, Manava entered the airlock, clutching the vial tightly. The Endeavor's crew watched in stunned silence as Manava descended into the water. His suit's light was a faint glow against the vast darkness. "Call him back," Silva said, her voice shaking. "He's not coming back," Henry muttered. Manava's voice crackled over the comms. "If this works, tell them I'm sorry." He swam toward SCP-3000, the vial of Y909 held out like an offering. The eel turned to face him, its eyes glowing with a terrible intelligence. For a moment, the water was still. Then SCP-3000 lunged, its jaws closing around Manava in a single fluid motion. The remaining divers reached the surface, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and terror. The Endeavor's crew hauled them aboard, their relief tempered by the loss of Manava. In the days that followed, the Y909 samples were secured, and the survivors were debriefed. But no one spoke of what they had seen. Henry sat alone in the ship's infirmary, staring out at the endless expanse of water. In his mind, he could still see the eel's coiled body, its unblinking eyes. He knew it wasn't over. Deep below the surface, SCP-3000 waited, and it would always be waiting. Now that you've stared into the abyss, or perhaps it has stared into you, let's talk about what makes SCP-3000 more than just a giant sea monster. This thing isn't just lurking at the bottom of the ocean for the sake of a good horror story. It's a symbol, a concept, and, depending on who you ask, maybe even a god. Let's start with the theories. The Anantashesha theory. Some researchers, like Dr. Venkat Krishnamurthy, believe SCP-3000 is none other than Anantashesha, the king of serpents from Hindu mythology. In the legends, Anantashesha lies beneath Vishnu, coiled in infinite loops, waiting for the end of time. If that's true, SCP-3000 isn't just an anomaly, it's the living embodiment of eternity. The serpent that will endure when the last star flickers out. Comforting, right? But here's the kicker. Even Krishnamurthy doubted his theory in his final moments. His last words, "I was wrong, it's not," leave us wondering, if SCP-3000 isn't Anantashesha, then what is it? The cognitohazardous black hole. Another theory posits that SCP-3000 is less a living organism and more a cognitohazard given form. Think of it as a black hole, but instead of swallowing light, it devours cognition. This theory explains the memory loss, the delusions, the way people near it seem to unravel like old rope. SCP-3000 doesn't just eat your body, it eats yourself. The byproduct of human belief. Then there's the idea that SCP-3000 wasn't always this way. Some fans believe it was once just a big eel, a relic of a time when creatures could grow to monstrous sizes. But when humans discovered it and believed it was a god, that belief changed it. This concept ties into the SCP Foundation's recurring theme of human perception shaping reality. If enough people think something is divine, maybe it becomes divine. Beyond the theories, SCP-3000 represents some of the SCP Foundation's most chilling themes. The ethics of sacrifice. The ATSAC protocol is perhaps the clearest example of the Foundation's moral grayness. They know SCP-3000 is dangerous, horrifying even. They know feeding D-Class personnel to it is ethically monstrous. But without Y909, the Foundation's amnestics program would collapse. How many lives would be lost if they couldn't make people forget the horrors they've seen? In the Foundation's cold calculus, the ends justify the means. But at what cost? The horror of cognitohazards. Unlike most monsters, SCP-3000 doesn't rely on brute strength to terrify. Its real power lies in its ability to strip away your sense of self. The idea that your thoughts, your memories, your very identity can be consumed is far scarier than any set of teeth or claws. SCP-3000 forces you to confront the fragility of the human mind and how easily it can unravel. The question of godhood. Whether or not SCP-3000 is truly divine doesn't matter. What matters is that it feels divine. Its size, its presence, its ability to warp reality, all of it points to something beyond human comprehension. And isn't that what gods are? Beings we can't fully understand, whose existence forces us to reckon with our insignificance, existential dread. At its core, SCP-3000 is a story about the void. The literal void of the ocean depths, yes, but also the void within us. The fear of being forgotten, of fading into nothingness. In that sense, SCP-3000 isn't just a monster. It's a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest fears back at us. Why do we keep coming back to SCP-3000? Why do stories about the unknown, the unfathomable, hold such power over us? Maybe it's because they remind us of something we try so hard to forget, that we don't have all the answers, that there are things lurking in the dark, both outside us and within us, that defy explanation. SCP-3000 isn't just a creature. It's a reminder of how small we are in the grand scheme of things. And yet, despite its terrifying presence, we keep diving deeper. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's hubris, or maybe, like the fishermen on that stormy night in 1971, we simply can't look away, and so the eel remains.